Welcome to episode 493 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I am here with
Andrew Swafford,
Michael O'Malley,
and Reid Ramsey.
In today's episode, we will be continuing our Cinematary Re-Do series with 1929's Man with a Movie Camera. We're digging far back into one part from episode 57, where we were 57 episodes into the podcast and we decided to declare the greatest movies of all time.
That's all the credentials anyone needs.
Yeah.
I've made 56 episodes of a podcast.
We know
I've seen it was after our first Critics Watch Old Movies series. And so we thought that, I've seen one movie from every decade. I can decide what the best movie from all the decades.
We're good.
Yeah.
So we had that, and then but we talk exclusively about Man with a Movie Camera as part of our documentary series, and this was episode 140.
So early.
We did a double feature of this and Apropos Denise.
Mm-hmm.
Which just spoiler alert. Young Zach will show up again to give us the intro, and young Zach also not great with Russian pronunciations.
Oh man,
is old Zach great with the Russian pronunciation?
He's not. Overall, Zach is not great. If one thing is steady throughout the 493 episodes of Cinematary so far is Zach is not great at pronouncing stuff that's not like Japanese,
French. What do you say?
I'm not good at French. Italian, I'm good at.
We're about to have to pronounce some Hungarian names in a few minutes.
So end of list. True. That's true. But yeah, we'll get to Man with a Movie Camera in part 2. We got a bunch of good ones here for part 1. We're gonna kick things off with The Brutalist.
Before we talk about The Brutalist, should we mention things coming up?
That's why I'm so glad you're here, and because you told me this earlier tonight. Not even earlier today, earlier tonight, and I knew I was going to forget it. So thank you.
Yeah, you're good.
So we have coming up on February 16th. So that is the Sunday prior to President's Day. We will be back at the Independent Picture House in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we will be joined by our friend Sam Shapiro, who did the live pod on Repo Man with us. We'll be joining Sam again, and we will be doing a live pod of Chungking Express, which will be one of the movies that we're doing for our Cinematary Re-Do series. Mm-hmm. It'll be Andrew, Michael, and Grace and I, along with Sam. And if you're in the Charlotte area and you listen to the podcast, whether you came out the first time or have latched on since, please show up for that one. It should be a good time. It's going to be, I think the movie starts at like 3:20, 3:30 on that Sunday.
Yeah, it's a matinee.
Mm-hmm. And I think we got to be out of the place by 6:30. So we're going to have a good time. Mm-hmm. We'll probably have like a cool after party and stuff somewhere in Charlotte if you want to join us. But yeah, show up February 16th, Independent Picture House, Chungking Express. The other thing is we mentioned it last week, but our 500th episode, we're going to kind of have a real celebration for that. We will be, I think, date to be determined, or do we get a date?
Date to be determined. We are hoping that it will be the first weekend of May, but still waiting on a specific date from our venue, Central Cinema.
But we will be at Central Cinema. Hopefully the first or second week of May, doing our 500th episode, movie to be determined as well. But we'll be at Central Cinema in Knoxville. Reid, maybe there too.
Ooh, that would be cool.
Blonde Reid?
We'll see if I'm still blonde by then.
Yeah.
I would really like to. I'm going to be in Knoxville like a month prior is maybe one of the only holdups, but we'll see.
Yeah.
But we're hoping to get some old faces on, we're going to do a movie. So we'll do a normal episode. And then I think a lot of the second part of the episode the first part will be the movie that we watch in Central Cinema. And the back half of it will probably be too long, but will be us kind of reminiscing on the podcast and talking about
down
stuff.
memory lane. Yeah.
But it's going to be, I think it's going to be a good event. We're going to have an after party across the street, possibly from Central Cinema, if Grace works her magic. And we're going to just celebrate the podcast as we look ahead past 500 episodes. So please, if you've listened to us at all, if you're in Knoxville, if you're anywhere in Tennessee, if you're in driving distance from Knoxville, please show up. It's going to be a great time. It's going to be fantastic. So show up for that. Yeah. We'll keep reminding you, or Andrew will keep reminding me to remind you.
I'll do my best.
All right, let's jump into The Brutalist. This is kind of
right in.
It's having itself a moment. This was one I caught it at TIFF. I was one of the idiots who waited 4 hours to like stand outside in line, then stand.
You could have watched The Brutalist in the time that it took you to get to The Brutalist.
Yeah, I stood outside for like 45 minutes. I stood inside for like 45 minutes, and then I sat through The Brutalist. And then it was a whole ass morning in Toronto. It was fun though. It was worth it.
It was first thing in the morning too.
It was first thing in the morning.
It was a bucket of cold water.
Yeah, I was like, I will see y'all at some point today. I don't know when. But it's gone wide now. A24 has released it wide. This is The Brutalist is directed by Brady Corbet, who his most recent movie was Vox Lux, which starred Natalie Portman, which also played at TIFF that I know Andrew saw, and we might mention that later. But for those who are unfamiliar with the movie, which was just nominated for a Best Picture Oscar, the movie escaping post-war Europe, visionary architect Laszlo Toth arrives in America to rebuild his life, his work, and his marriage to his wife Erzsébet after being forced apart during wartime by shifting borders and regimes. On his own in a strange new country, Laszlo settles in Pennsylvania, where the wealthy and prominent industrialist Harrison Lee Van Buren recognizes his talent for building, but power and legacy come at a heavy cost. It stars Adrian Brody, Felicity Jones, Guy Pearce, Joe Alwyn, number of other people. Like I mentioned, I saw this at TIFF, so I'm kind of curious, Andrew and Michael, what y'all made of this movie.
I guess I'll jump in first because my history with Brady Corbet goes back to Vox Lux playing at TIFF and seeing that. And I actually avoided The Brutalist at TIFF this past year because I had such a distaste for Brady Corbet. When I heard that he had made like a 3.5 hour movie about, an architect plunging into despair, I was like, nah, miss me with that. I don't want to see any of that.
He was very much just like, Zach, have fun with that. I'll see you later.
Yeah, I'm going to go watch like the new Cronenberg or something. But you sold me on it, and it has kind of recontextualized Brady Corbet for me a little bit. I'm wondering, kind of looking back at the whole filmography, if like he's very interested in character studies of like ladder climbers, specifically like people who are just trying to raise their status in the world. And like I kind of took issue with Vox Lux at the time because like it was a movie about a very like self-centered person like that, but that person also happened to be like a survivor of a school shooting, which I had like spent the entire year researching and making a video essay for Cinematary. So I think I might have been wanting it to be something that it wasn't. But I think that with The Brutalist, if that is kind of like the character archetype that he's following, like this is a very sympathetic, I would say, like point of view into that kind of a story, because it's about somebody who kind of can't climb the ladder, who's trying to, but is kind of like continually brick walled by all the various types of inequality and prejudice that exist in America. And, there's so much to say about the movie that I'm sure we'll get into as we bounce around back and forth. But I did really like this. It feels like this enormous slab of concrete of a movie in a cool way, I think. And I'm absolutely in love with the score for this movie by a composer that I have not seen anything else by. I don't know.
He was Andrew. Like I was listening to the score this weekend, or actually a couple of days ago. And do you remember that like kind of flash in the pan, like trendy indie band called Yuck?
No,
they were like 2009, 2010 kind of like Pitchfork darling. But he's from Yuck. Like I was shocked.
Interesting. Yeah, this is like, it reminds me of like Phantom Thread, like Johnny Greenwood's Phantom Thread score. Like it's almost all or like very much dominated by just solo piano, but like captured in a way that like has so much kind of ambiance and like beautiful echoes kind of bouncing off of it that it just kind of carries you through the movie and through some like very long and like, I don't know, not difficult sequences, but like sequences that are kind of emotionally distant a lot of the time. And I one other thing that I should say about the movie before kind of passing it off to Michael is that I, at the moment, can't say how much I personally like The Brutalist because, like, I don't know how much my perspective on it is colored by the fact that it came out the same week that Trump got into office, right? Like, I don't want to say that, like, A24 specifically planned that because that would be kind of evil on their part, I think. But I think that it came out a week that made the impact of it feel like as massive as possible.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because, I mean, I think I know what you mean, but I don't disagree.
I mean, but we're currently deporting like over 1,000 immigrants.
Oh, I see the immigrant,
right?
The immigrant angle.
And this is a movie about like this very obviously supposedly core value of America that like we are a nation of immigrants and like have a fucking like hundreds of feet tall statue saying like, hello, immigrants, please come over here. And
it's basically the first image you see in the movie, except
it is
upside down.
You're seeing it upside down in a way that, like, if I was feeling particularly rude towards Brady Corbett, I would just kind of roll my eyes at and say,
dude,
that
the
it was,
whole
like,
movie,
way too obvious.
the whole movie is like, if I didn't already like this movie, this would be the worst shit ever.
Yeah, exactly. But anyways, those are my thoughts on it. Michael, what did you think?
I agree with what you said. I've spent a lot of the time. It's been about a week, right? When did we see this movie? Andrew
on MLK Day, on the inauguration day.
Oh, right, of course. Yeah, you just said that.
Yeah.
So I've spent like the week and a half since seeing this movie, like really puzzling over it because I walked out of it being very impressed because I saw Vox Lux, and while I didn't hate it like you, Andrew, I also was kind of like, okay, and I would not have expected this movie out of the same director. So
very stylistically different.
Very stylistically different. There's narrative echoes, like you said, survivor of an atrocity, ladder climber, like that sort of thing. Artists at the center, but I found it really hypnotizing and beguiling. I was thinking that the 3.5 hours was going to be like this, like kind of tough sit because of how long it is, but
it's not
flew by. Like I was just like entranced the whole time, but then I come out of it. And then after having this kind of entrancing aesthetic experience, I'm now like having to sift through, okay, what does it mean? And I've really done a lot of thinking and reading about this, and I still don't exactly know what the answer to that is. Because in some ways, it's very transparent. Because, like you said, there's like the kind of Godfather Part 2-esque, like immigrant, constantly denied like a chance to do anything, that he aspires to do. Running up against the kind of the WASPs attacking like the ethnic European, immigrants, that is like
as well as Jewish
and anti-Semitic attacks on specifically, and that's a very clear thread throughout the movie. Some of the other threads are not so clear, including like I think Laszlo himself, which Adrian Brody's character or performance is amazing. Like I think Adrian Brody is really great in this. Also, like truly, like I would say most of the cast is really good. Joe Alwyn is someone I only knew through the lens of Taylor Swift before this movie, but he is a terrific like prick in this movie, like just a rich asshole, and he's great. Guy Pearce is very good as like a Howard Hughes, like evil kind of rich man.
He is like such a vaguely defined rich man in a way that I love. Like, where does this man's money come from? Who knows? He's just rich.
He's just rich. He's like
rich.
He's just aristocracy. Like that's all. Like it's just nakedly that. So anyway, there's a lot of like I really love the characters because they're really interesting in ways that like I saw people later comparing it to the work of Paul Thomas Anderson. And I think retroactively, I wasn't thinking about that during the movie, but I think retroactively it's like abundantly clear that that's like the blueprint that this movie's working in. You've got
I think that's the kind of stylistic, aesthetic blueprint that he's pulling from.
Yeah, and especially with the characters, you have this kind of like dialectic between like two characters, right? Which is like There Will Be Blood or The Master, to an extent, like Inherent Vice, like set against these like really iconic historical milieus. But then there's other stuff that's like really strange, including the epilogue, which this is a spoiler, but like the movie is in 3 parts.
Well, 4, right? There's a prologue. Act 1. There's an Act 2, and there's an epilogue.
Prologue's very short. Epilogue's very short. Act 1 and 2 are basically 2 halves of the movie, cut by an actual intermission, which I genuinely appreciate.
There's
a 15-minute intermission in the middle of this, and it's wonderful. All movies, even the 80-minute ones, should have intermissions. Man with the Movie Camera should have an intermission.
I don't know if I agree with that. I don't know if I would go that far.
As someone who has to watch movies in pieces a lot these days,
I feel like once we're approaching the 3-hour mark.
Michael, calm down. Come on.
Whatever the case, the Brutalist intermission is very welcome. And it there's basically before Laszlo's wife enters the United States and then after Laszlo's wife enters the United States. And then you have the prologue, which is his niece. Is it his niece?
A character that I'm still very
his niece is being questioned in the prologue, basically after having been liberated from a concentration camp. And then the epilogue is also his niece after she has settled in Israel.
And it's like 20
It's
years?
in the 80s. In the 80s. So the majority of the movie takes place in like the 40s through the 50s, I guess. And then in the 80s is the epilogue, this like maybe 5-minute epilogue in which the niece is the focus again, in a way. And I just found that structure very puzzling, especially being bookended by the niece, which what's her name again? Is it Zofia? Who spends the majority of the movie absolutely silent in a total cipher, right? Like
in a way that like makes you think that she's actually mute, but she's not.
Well, the first words that she says.
Well, what I've read about it.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say what it's been said in interviews and interpreted as is she's coming out of the Holocaust and the concentration camp. She's been like, because of that experience, she's mute.
Well, and the first words out of her mouth, or the first notable words out of her mouth, are that she and her husband are moving to Israel to settle there. And then the epilogue is her as like basically a representative of the state of Israel, like giving an award to Laszlo on behalf of the state of Israel for his contributions to the art of architecture and like going through all of his achievements.
But in a way that is like notably misunderstanding his work accidentally or on purpose.
Because Laszlo's been very opaque about what the purpose of his work is, but he has this kind of manifesto earlier in the movie where he says like he wants his work to be like the spark for revolution or something like that, which kind of fits the general like real history of brutalism being tied to socialism, I guess. But the epilogue's very strange. It's like filmed with like, I think I read it was filmed on Betamax. Parts of it were.
What?
But there's parts of it that look like digital video, right? And then there's parts of it
of
like
the time. Yeah.
There's parts of it that cut back to like the VistaVision, I guess, which it loudly proclaims that the whole movie is filmed in beforehand.
It looks nice.
It looks very nice. The whole movie looks amazing, but I just don't know what to make of that ending. And I've spent a long time like wrestling over it. And like the big conversation point is this Zionist or not? But also like, what is this woman about? Like the Zofia's character, I feel like I'm not sure what the movie wants to do with her. And ultimately now I think my take that I've settled on is that I found the movie to be such an entrancing aesthetic, like cinema going experience that I came out of it assuming it must have some great meaning. And maybe the lesson that I need to take is this is a movie that is muddy to the point of unable to give a clear meaning. And I'm looking for something to hoping to justify thematically what I loved so much aesthetically about this movie. Because I've read so many takes on this movie and none of them have arrived at something that I feel confident that like, yes, I can now see the movie has opened up for me.
Sure.
And I am completely confident that this was the intention.
So I feel like, sorry, I want to let you get in, Zach, but I wanted to mention I think the movie would shrink in my eyes if somebody presented to me like a take that like fully explained kind of one-to-one. Here's what the movie was meant to be doing. I
don't exactly mean that.
Mark Kermode said about it was that like because the movie is so vast and novelistic and has so many different like running threads going through it, people will probably be debating what the movie is about for years and years. And like there are so many different things in it you could kind of like point at and like draw connections to. I don't know if I fully agree with that. I think that the movie is in some ways kind of direct and straightforward with its plotting and its theming, but I do kind of like the haziness of it.
I like the haziness too until I don't. Like it's hard to put my finger on, because I also agree that I don't want someone to be able to, in a sentence, say this is what the Brutalist means.
It's about
like a theme statement. You're right. The Brutalist is about Trump or something like that. But there are things about the movie that they don't feel satisfying in their ambiguity, I guess. And I think like Zofia for a lot of the movie, like
I agree with that.
It's so opaque that it doesn't feel like I have enough for the ambiguity to be intriguing. It's simply enough for me to feel like it's muddy, like the waters are muddy. Mm-hmm. There are other things I think are very intriguing. Like there's the moment right before the epilogue cuts on a very mysterious moment, and I find that endlessly like engaging to think about. Whereas other things in the movie, I'm like, I just don't know what to do with this. I don't know, Zach. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's been very interesting reading more about it. Michael and I were talking about it a little bit this week because Michael shared Richard Brody's review in the New Yorker, which if you have not read that,
very good review.
It's a really good review. I don't agree. We talked about it, but I don't agree with all of it. But he makes some really strong points. But what's been really frustrating, like interpreting it, is that when Brady Corbet and what's his wife's name?
His co-writer, right?
Mona Fassvold, his wife and his co-writer. When they've talked about it, they get into like they're kind of like, oh, it's like to a degree, it's like an allegory on the artist and their patron.
I actually like that reading, honestly.
Really?
I do.
That's so obvious, though. Like that's obviously what it's about.
I mean, yeah true.
Well. And I feel like that's a lot of it, but I also find that very like less interesting. And honestly, I find that to be semi careless for a story that's like about this post World War II immigrant experience, and you're like, that's like, this is what we're showing you, but it's also about the artist and the patron. I'm like, that seems so inconsequential to
that's
what
like saying 2001 is about space travel, though. Like that's literally the plot of the movie, is the relationship between the artist and his patron.
Well, okay, so if I could give or like maybe paraphrase, let me see if I can actually find the quote. But there was a quote from Brady Corbet that did make me think about it differently. He said, it was only made for $1 million, but I still need millions of dollars. That's very complicated because it means I often have to interface with people with whom I don't share the same ethics and morals. And I think that like dynamic that like artists who make films have to go through is like an interesting thing to document. And because like that dynamic between an artist and a patron has kind of existed through all art forms throughout a lot of history.
Sure.
I don't know. I've never really seen that depicted before. And I had never really considered the ethical dimensions of the people doing the financing of the art that I like. I mean, I guess it's not fair to say I've never thought about it, but I think this movie makes that front and center in a way that I find very compelling.
I get that, and I'm fine with that path. I just feel like it's a bit like to take this concentration camp survivor and his immigrant experience in America, but to also make that an allegory to the artist and the patron experience seems just kind of like careless to me. Like,
well, like those things are equivalent by any.
No, but that's how he's kind of taken the path, and that seems wrong.
Do you think that's evasive? Because I cannot believe that you would write a movie like this with the only intention being I just want to explore the artist and his patron. Like dude
but
isn't a
surely
fucking
that's not the only
artist
thing Brady Corbett
that's the only thing that they've been talking about really in interviews. Like when he's talked about it, he's really leaned on that compared to anything related to any other themes or topics that would be.
Well, is the rest of it?
This is when I would say that like I disagree with you on your like how you're reading your own movie. Like there are obviously more things happening in this movie than just that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well,
good movie though. Like I don't
want to be negative. I like the movie and it grew for me in the second viewing and I got more out of it and it left me thinking a lot about themes that weren't the artist and patron relationship.
Same. Yeah.
But that's been a frustrating, like if that's the reading that we're supposed to take, I'm like, that makes it less interesting to me.
I was texting Zach about this. We were talking about the Richard Brody review, and it's like, it's weird to have a movie that I have so many qualms with, or I'm not sure how I feel about, like a lot of the granular details of it, while also like ultimately like really liking the movie. Like if I were to remake my Cinematary ballot, like this would 100% be on my absolutely. Top 10, maybe even my top 5. Like I found it like great in so many ways. And so like, it's weird that like my mind is just kind of focusing on all the ways that I didn't quite, latch onto that. 'Cause I really liked it. I think that we all probably need more time to percolate on The Brutalist before like we will end up landing on how we ultimately feel about it. It's a lot of movie.
I've seen it twice now, and I'm like, I kind of want a third time at least because I'm like, there's still stuff to bite off of it. But Brutalist, it's in theaters now. I think we can all say like you should go see it. Recommend seeing it. Yeah, like
it's nice to be like trapped in a theater with it. Yeah, and like the intermission kind of makes it feel like it's not a slog, really. Like it felt like kind of a leisurely afternoon at the movies.
It's really nice.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of being trapped in one space, Reid, do you want to talk about the latest Steven Soderbergh project that just released in the theaters?
Great segue.
A great segue. Well, I was going to say the movie I'm going to talk about is about a third the length of The Brutalist. It's like a tight 86 minutes or something like that. As Steven Soderbergh tends to be a little abrupt sometimes. But Presence is his newest film, experiment, however you kind of want to pitch how Soderbergh's working these days.
His projects.
Yeah, his newest project, where he's more or less taken some formal idea and making it front and center for a plot, and then kind of building the plot around that. And in this one, I don't think this is a spoiler per se.
No, not at all.
But the camera is a ghost in a home. And it's shot on this extremely wide angle lens. It's Steadicam operated, so the cameraman, the ghost, is just moving through this space. Yeah, Soderbergh.
Is it an iPhone? Do we know?
Yeah.
It is. So yeah, he shot it. Yeah, he did it.
Yeah.
But is it an iPhone? Is what I asked.
I don't know.
You
know, Zach?
I think
he's moved on from that.
He's moved on from that a little bit. Okay. I think this is a camera. Yeah.
But it's extremely wide angle, and the space is pretty tight. It's this kind of old, tight's the wrong word. It's a big old house, but because it's older, there's a lot of tight corners, and the rooms aren't necessarily massive. So as the camera's moving, it can be like pretty, like nauseating is the wrong term, but dizzying is more how I felt, because there's a lot of moments where the ghost is moving faster than the camera can quite handle. But this family, kind of led by Lucy Liu and Chris Sullivan, a married couple with 2 kids, move into the home to kind of, it's unclear at first, but it seems like they're kind of escaping from some trauma that's happened to the family.
Oh, it's their daughter's friend has died, right?
Yeah, has overdosed. And so some of the members of the family care more than others. The daughter's really affected, and the son is an athlete, and they wanted to be in a good school zone, or school district. So they end up in this house that is haunted pretty much. I mean, it's from the moment they step in, the house is haunted. The painters that arrive to prep for them to even move in, one of them won't enter one of the rooms because I guess this person is more aware. They say some of the characters have like access in some ways, like a door can be open to them to where they can sense the ghost, and therefore they're not going in certain rooms. And it's really it's semi unclear to us what's happening for a lot of the movie.
Yeah.
Wait, who else seen it here? Okay. Zach, did you see that, Tiff? Okay.
Yeah, I caught it.
Gotcha. It's pretty unclear exactly what is happening in terms of the family drama and stuff, but we basically get the ghost's point of view of the family drama for most of the runtime. It's not, while it's ostensibly a horror movie, in a lot of ways.
It's not though. Like not even a little bit.
To be at a couple points. There's a couple like moments, like he kind of dives into the elements you might typically get from like a ghost or supernatural story. Like you get some furniture shaking, you get things levitating that shouldn't be levitating, you get people aware of this presence. It's like almost Paranormal Activity-esque, but not really. Like it's way more interested in the family drama, the family dynamics. But the whole time you're observing as this ghost. And to be honest with y'all, I don't know how you felt exactly about it, but it lost me a bit with the plot itself. I think it got a little too plotted.
I agree.
Which I think that tends to be something Soderbergh can do pretty quickly. Like he has a great concept, he's got great characters, he shoots it beautifully, and then just like kind of goes off the rails for like 10 minutes, like with some plot stuff.
He's also been working lately. This is the second or third movie he's worked with David Koepp, who is a longtime Spielberg collaborator. He wrote Jurassic Park, a number of other like Spielberg movies from that period of time. And so it's also like a different, compared to some of the stuff he's done, it's a different, this is somebody who's worked on much more, not elevated, but like bigger movies, and is kind of bringing that perspective to the scripts.
I agree with that. That makes sense. I think to me, this one kind of highlights both the good and bad of Steven Soderbergh really well, because it is this tension with him of really interested in a formal idea and in something that could almost become experimental cinema. He never quite gets there, but it almost could become that. And then being really bound by narrative conventions. It's like Soderbergh used to be the one people would talk about of like, he's making his indie movie, but then he's making his Ocean's 11 so that he can fund his indie movies. Well, now these days he's just like kind of combining the two simultaneously, and it's making some like good thrillers. Like I liked the other one you mentioned, or the other one David Koepp wrote was Kimmy, which I liked that one.
See Kimmy, I've heard it's great.
It's really good. Yeah,
he's great.
He's made some really good thrillers this way, but this one, for the first like 30 minutes of this movie, I was utterly entranced.
Oh, absolutely.
I thought the cinematography was unbelievable. I was so in the space. I was also sitting there knowing we were going to record this, and I was like, this is so stupid. But I was like, Ghost with a movie camera. Like, this is perfect. Like, this is such a good segue. But it really... It's really effective for most of it, and then sometimes it just like really he gets way too. I gotta tie this up in a narrative.
It's maybe a good example of when you don't need to have the Jurassic Park writer working on your scripts, right? Like if your premise is ghost stuck in a house, like it doesn't need to become bombastic by the end, right?
Right.
Like I remember back when we recorded an episode on Paranormal Activity, I said that like one of the things I loved about that movie was like the slowness of the surveillance cam, and how like I would love to see a Paranormal Activity movie that was directed by like a Pitchapong or a Sethacool or something like that. And like this so easily could be that, but then it kind of becomes something very different than that in like the last half. Mostly because like I don't know, it introduces like physical threat, because like horror movies, I guess, always have to introduce physical threat in a way that feels like really artificially cranked up. You know, it feels like it breaks with like the verisimilitude of these people's lives that we've been just sort of silently observing, and their lives are really interesting. Like it's kind of like the sense you get from like watching the pilot of Twin Peaks or something, where like you're just getting a sense of like all the various like levels of these people's relationships that they're hiding from one another, and like the complexity of all of their lives. And there's stuff in it that I actually wish I knew more about. Like I am infuriated that they do not reveal what the like supposedly illegal thing that Lucy Liu is in.
Yeah,
because I have a strong hunch as to what that is, but it's kind of really unsatisfying that it does not like take you all the way to that conclusion in the movie. I don't know.
The thing I like about it too is like to your point, the interactions between the family members, the like honestly a lot of fights, like very tense conversations are like so yeah, it's not a horror movie, but there's some deeply upsetting scenes just between absolutely. Like husband and wife or wife, mother and daughter, like there's just like some of that stuff adds this like tension to it that's not horror tension, but just like unsettling,
the horror of mundanity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, to your point, Andrew, Lucy Liu, the matriarch of the family, is like embroiled in some legal issue with work, and she's very clearly like a super successful business person of some kind.
She's constantly checking her email. She's not doing anything but checking her email. Yeah.
On the phone. Like she's checking her email, she's on the phone, she's working 100% of the time, even in bed. But there's some legal issue that keeps being brought up that's never resolved, which like that's fine to introduce in the movie, but I think it would have been a more interesting route to go down.
Would it be spoilery to share what we think the crime is if it's not actually revealed in the movie?
I mean, no, I don't think so. I'm assuming embezzlement. I don't know what.
Oh, I was wondering if there was something ancestral going on with her and the son.
Oh,
do you know why?
Someone who knows the scene in this movie those are two wild guesses.
Those are very different things.
Incredibly different. Just give me some evidence, more evidence than that. It's very clear she's a
say more.
Son.
Do you know the scene where she's like up late drinking and like talking to her son about how she's like never loved anyone more than him and like really touchy with him in a way that like he seems to get uncomfortable about and go to bed and say like, and also sort of like there's kind of an implication that there's really bad drinking going on in the house generally. And I don't know if that's what the movie was trying to suggest. I should think about that. But when the dad was on the phone crying to a lawyer about what does it mean for a spouse if your spouse is into something that is illegal, that felt like more emotionally charged than embezzlement to me.
I'll be honest. I did not get that. That's a whole. I mean. If that's the case, that's a whole other layer that I would have liked to explore that over what's going on with the daughter's boyfriend.
I will say ultimately, while the mechanics of the plot just kind of lose me because it didn't feel like it fit the nature of the movie, the end itself, like the very last reveal, the last shot, was very. Oh, I thought it was pretty effective.
I do like the idea, but it's a little corny.
It's like maybe staged a little corny.
Yeah.
But no, I would recommend seeing it, especially for the tight runtime. And I just have kind of like a plaguing interest in Steven Soderbergh, as I know you do too, Zach.
That's kind of what I was gonna say. I'm like, man, I'm so like drunk and in the bag for Soderbergh. Like I absolutely adore the period he's in right now where he's just like trying 100%. Shit and he's just trying shit and he's like experimental and just like there I agree, like there's so much of this movie that I just really loved. Like when he's just throwing that camera around and people are like having conversations and you're just shifting around to like different moments and like different heightened tensions because something's happened off camera, but you maybe skipped a few days and things like that. Like it's so great.
I love that every scene is like a single shot.
Yeah.
Yes.
Incredible.
And a lot of like the ghost movements and the ghost like attempts to like interact with people, I find to be pretty effective. In my review from TIFF, I compared it to The Haunting, as well as A Ghost Story by David Lowery.
A Ghost Story is probably the best point of comparison, but A Ghost Story kind of sticks to its original principles, I guess, in a way that this movie doesn't quite.
And like my overall thing is just like, like Steve gets a little messy. Steve, it's usually pretty imperfect a lot of times. Yeah. But damn, I'd rather see what Soderbergh's doing than like just about any other working filmmaker today.
He's like,
I agree.
He has the ability to crank out more 3.5 and 4-star movies than like any director in history. Like, I think most of the movies I've ever seen by that dude, I have rated on Letterboxd somewhere between 3 and 4 stars. Like, very rarely above, very rarely below.
This might be like a slightly deeper cut, but did y'all see Mosaic?
No, but I want to see it.
So he released it first as an app.
Yes.
Which is Soderbergh thing. It was just like an app. It's a choose your own narrative kind of movie. Although you don't have a ton of control. You just get to like pick who you follow through the plot basically in the app, which is why it was an app. It was produced by HBO, so I think it's probably still sitting on Max.
Is it in portrait mode?
No, it was not in portrait mode when I watched the app. Although I don't know what the HBO version, whatever's on Max, can't function that same way. I'm sure they don't have it set up to do that.
I think it's more of like a straightforward narrative than the app was.
I don't know. Netflix had that Bandersnatch Black Mirror thing, and they were able to kind of incorporate a choose your own adventure like menu selection. I'm sure HBO could do it.
Yeah, this was just like 2017, and no one watched it, so they may not have the energy to go back and do it.
Maybe true.
But this movie Presence kind of reminds me of it, because instead of like the user choosing their own adventure, it really is like the ghost choosing the narrative threads it's going to follow. Which, like, to speak to your point of like, you might want to follow one thing, like we might want to see what's happening with the marriage that's kind of crumbling before our eyes. The ghost instead has more interest in following the teenage daughter, right? Which, like, we maybe learn eventually, like, why that might be the case. But in the moment, it's like, well, I kind of wanted to follow this conversation, but instead the movie's taking me this way. And I think the sound design's interesting too. I'd be interested to know if it's more complex than they simply like stuck the microphone on Steven Soderbergh essentially and had it follow wherever he was.
Because
it really, it's pretty like broad, but only picks up like the room he's in most of the time. And not like, it doesn't, I feel like it never focuses on a character quite like we expect in like most typical movies. So
do you guys know, in the credits, did they credit him as Steven Soderbergh, or did he use one of his aliases?
It's what do they call him for
Gregory Jacobs.
Yeah.
Oh, really? He's not credited as the director of the movie?
Dude,
no,
he's movies now. He does like 4 or 5 or 6 roles, but he credits himself differently.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, he's
director.
He's the director, and I think a co-writer or whatever, or developed the story with David Kapp. But yeah, the cinematographer's Gregory Jacobs.
That's funny.
And cinematographer of Magic Mike XXL.
I love the guy. Like, I love that. That's fantastic.
I love Steven Soderbergh. I love that stuff.
Especially like, I'm thinking today, I was reading this story about Quentin Tarantino, and he's still talking about his goddamn 10th movie he's going to make. And let me tell you, I'm getting tired of that fucking guy.
Yeah, me too.
I'm getting so tired of that guy and his 10 fucking movies. In the amount of time that he's talked about making his 10th movie, Soderbergh's made like 60 movies, I swear to God.
Right.
And retired in the middle of that.
I love that.
Dude,
guy.
That would be the most irritating. I'm not tired of Quentin Tarantino because I'm just blissfully aware of what he's unaware of what he's saying. But that would be the most irritating thing if he does like a Michael Jordan, like, or Steven Soderbergh,
he was
making a big deal of retiring and then doesn't go away, sort of thing.
I recently saw a headline of him making a big stink about how movies ended in 2019. Coincidentally, when he put out his last movie. Yeah.
See, I think that stuff is funny. Like, that sort of thing's funny.
Yeah. Well, we've gone a little bit longer, so Andrew, I apologize. I don't know.
Yeah, we can cut mine, but I will briefly say people should watch Evil Does Not Exist. Zach already talked about it in the top 10 of the year episode. I will just co-sign. That is a fantastic movie. You should watch it.
Yeah. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with Man with a Movie Camera in part 2 after this. And we are back with part 2 of episode 493 of Cinematary. In this part, we'll be continuing our Cinematary Re-Do series with 1929's Man with a Movie Camera. And as we did last week, I did not make a fact sheet, and I'm going to need a little help, not from my friends, but from my younger self 8 years ago.
I'm going to call the realest guy I know.
Yeah.
Everything Zach's been saying off mic is how amazing he was in this old Cinematary episode.
I'm really good. I'm really good, y'all. Here we go.
All right, let's get to the names. We got this. We got a nice Russian movie. All right. A Man with a Movie Camera. It was directed by the Soviet-Russian director Dziga Vertov, and it was edited by his wife, Elizaveta Svilova, which if you've seen it, she's like, she, as Kevin Durant would say, the real MVP. The film has no story or actors, and it presents urban life in the Soviet cities of Kiev, Kharkov, Moscow, and Odessa. I'm going to say that in the most Texan way, Odessa. Man with a Movie Camera is the film's famous for the range of cinematic techniques that Vertov invents, deploys, or develops, such as double exposure, fast motion, slow motion, freeze frames, jump cuts, split screens, Dutch angles, extreme close-ups, tracking shots, footage played backwards, stop motion animation, and self-reflexive visuals. At one point, it features a split-screen tracking shot. The sides have opposite Dutch angles. Vertov belonged to a movement of filmmakers known as Kinox or Kino Eyes. Vertov, along with other Kino artists, declared it their mission to abolish all non-documentary styles of filmmaking. This radical approach to movie making led to a slight dismantling of the film industry, the very field in which they were working in. Most of Vertov's films were highly controversial, and the Kino Eyes movement was despised by many filmmakers of the time. Vertov's crowning achievement, Man with a Movie Camera, was his response to critics who rejected his previous film, A Sixth Part of the World. Critics had declared that Vertov's overuse of intertitles was inconsistent with the filmmaking style to which this movement subscribed, which is super ironic because he literally opens this movie with, "There are no intertitles in this," which I liked because it was just like the most like, I'm not going to do that again. Screw you guys. Working within a Marxist ideology, Vertov strove to create a futuristic city that would serve as a commentary on existing ideals in the Soviet world. This artificial city's purpose was to awaken the Soviet citizen through truth and to ultimately bring about understanding and action. The Kino's aesthetic shine through in his portrayal of electrification, industrialization, and the achievements of workers through hard labor. This could also be viewed as early modernism in film. Some have mistakenly stated that many visual ideas, such as the quick editing, the close-ups of machinery, the store window displays, even the shots of a typewriter keyboard, are borrowed from Walter Ruttmann's Berlin Symphony of a Great City from 1927, which predates Man with a Movie Camera by 2 years. But as Vertov wrote to the German press in 1929, these techniques and images have been developed and employed by him in his Kino Pravda newsreels and documentaries for the last 10 years, all of which predate Berlin. Vertov's Soviet contemporaries criticized the film's focus on form over content, with Sergei Eisenstein even deriding the film as, quote, pointless camera hooliganism, which I'm 100% stealing for future reviews.
Oh, yeah.
Documentary filmmaker Paul Rotha said that in Britain, Vertov was, quote, regarded really as rather a joke. All this cutting in one camera, photographing another camera, it was all trickery, and we didn't take it seriously. The New York Times at the time said the producer Vertov does not take into consideration the fact that the human eye fixes for a certain space of time that which holds the attention. But in 2009, Roger Ebert wrote about the film, saying it made explicit and poetic the astonishing gift the cinema made possible of arranging what we see, ordering it, imposing a rhythm and language on it, and transcending it.
I want to just say that I'm glad that throughout the 10 years or so of Cinematary that I at least have Andrew to lean on to give me a good laugh about.
Yeah, I got you.
Whether my jokes hit or don't hit, at least I get a good chuckle out of Andrew.
Some of them are better than others.
Listen, we can't all bat 1,000. I made a nice Kevin Durant reference. I don't know if I'd sit back on that one.
I thought it was funny that that was a phrase that you needed to contribute to someone. In 2025, that's just the real MVP. Everyone says the real MVP.
Yeah, but it came from Kevin Durant. So, man with a movie camera. Shifting back over to episode 140. Here is my review at the time of how I thought about it.
I would like to say that I was going in feeling like I was going to be bored. I was kind of but one, I would like to, I don't know if I highly doubt, I was looking up information on this. I highly doubt this was the original score used, but whatever the one they have on Filmstruck is just utterly it kind of helped me get it along, because it really made this exuberant, very jumpy, very bouncy. Actually, it was almost this a score that you would have. It was much different from Hakusan, which we watched last week, which the score was so trolly and lolly and it was kind of playing variations off actual classical music pieces, but it was doing them in this very dour. It was just awful. I couldn't. It was really putting me to sleep. But this one was a lot more. It was a lot more.
It's very percussive, right? I think we're the same score is at the beginning. Once the orchestra starts playing, is it a lot of just quick tapping sounds, kind of like a tick of a clock or something?
It reminded me of the sequence in Wes Anderson's Grand Budapest Hotel where Willem Dafoe is chasing Jeff Goldblum, and it's that.
Yeah, I think we listened to this.
Yeah, it was great. I loved it. So I was imagining the first part of this documentary as a Wes Anderson movie.
And I think the score that you listen to this movie with will probably greatly impact your reader film and your enjoyment.
It's true. But I'll say after introducing that I was going to be bored watching, I was thoroughly entertained. I thought that this was actually an incredibly interesting film. Not just the editing is A+. It reminded me a lot of when we were watching A Birth of a Nation last year, where it's doing a lot of cinematic techniques that today we kind of take for granted, so it kind of just glazes over us. But it took me after about 15 minutes to kind of start focusing on some of the stuff that Vertov was doing, and it made it incredibly impressive, because he has these
that's staying in
these shots that he'll have where the camera's on top of a train. Then like I mentioned before, you have these split screens and these split screens tracking shots. There's just so many little tricks that he does that, they're tricks, but there's something so inherently cinematic about that, because it's what affords you using it's what makes movies different from literature or music or painting or other art forms, you get this visual component, and it seems like Vertov is using it to its nth degree, and so because it really strikes all of these chords on what makes cinema its own art form, and kind of what distinguishes it from the other ones.
Man, did not expect Zach outing himself as a Birth of a Nation fan to come out of nowhere in the middle of that.
There's techniques that have been picked up from it.
We also did an episode on Birth of a Nation if you want to know how much that movie sucks, because we're very much on the record about that.
Whose sneeze was that? Was that you, Andrew?
I have no idea.
No, I think it was Nadine. And I like to keep that in because it's just like that's how low craft this was at this point in time, you know?
Also, Zach getting a lot of Boss Baby vibes from Man with a Movie Camera.
You know, it's giving me a lot of Wes Anderson vibes there. I do, so to bring up to add to one point that I was making about like the score that you listen to with it, I like it does make a difference. And so
absolutely.
I know Andrew, you watched something specific for your viewing, but for this time, and I promise I'm not doing this because he's like sitting in here or that he's like he's one of my closest friends, but I listened to Andrew Swafford's synth test while I watched this movie.
AndrewSwafford.bandcamp.com.
Yeah. And let me just say, it hits really well. Like, honestly, like I know you have plans with doing this, but like you should like take Man with a Movie Camera and like work synth test a little bit, and you can have something there.
What's the duration comparison? Is synth test as long as Man with a Movie Camera?
No, it's about 42 minutes, and so I had to restart it at that mark. But yeah, it was really good. There was like
cool.
There's a sequence in it when like you're getting these like vast city shots, and like it's where he's kind of superimposing, like so it looks almost like there's millions and millions of people despite like the thousands. And let me look at the track. I think it was Radar Pings.
That's one of my favorites on synth test. I actually can't listen to that album because there's a lot of it that I just like hate now, but that is one that I think holds up.
No, we got there. Like you get to the point from Radar Pings to Window Pane that just like absolutely lined up with what I was watching in Man with a Movie Camera, and it was great. So just you know,
thank you.
That wasn't me just trying to get like an ad in for it. It would like legitimately was really good.
You can do free advertising for my music whenever you want. That's fine.
Okay. But yeah, this time I didn't think I was watching a Wes Anderson movie this time, and I didn't draw comparisons to Birth of a Nation.
Such an innovative film.
I think to pause really quickly. I didn't hear any of the intros. I messaged that, so like to me, this is like a bit y'all are doing where you can just say anything that could have been said during that time.
No, that was actually all real.
It was all real. It wasn't as incredibly interesting as I think I said in my review of it. But I got a lot more out of it. The movie, actually, I was thinking about a lot. That I think we've talked about on an episode is Dock Worker's Dream. Which
that's such a good comparison. Yeah,
which honestly like is in my like top movie, like favorite movies ever. Like I watch that periodically.
Incredible. Yeah.
Just because between the sequences and the lamb chop score, like I just like I love that thing. Yeah. But I was thinking about that a lot, just in terms of like just this like this parade of and this montage of just like people and places and faces and like technology and industrialism and like all of that kind of all converging together to again synth tests.
I thought a lot about Koyaanisqatsi watching this, and watching it, I did not like the score that I watched it on Canopy, and it's the Alloy score. Hold on. Anyway, I thought the score was terrible. Yeah, the Alloy Orchestra of Cambridge, Massachusetts. But anyway, I thought that was terrible. And so I was trying to think like of other movies like this that are kind of like montage experimental documentaries. I was thinking like obviously Koyaanisqatsi is the most one of the most iconic, but one of the reasons it's so iconic is the Philip Glass score. And I was like, what would Koyaanisqatsi be without the Philip Glass score?
What if you put the Philip Glass score from Koyaanisqatsi?
I actually thought about that because I rewatched part of this movie today. I'm like, what am I going to play while I listen to this? And I considered that. But I think one thing that like makes it interesting, probably like less than like Koyaanisqatsi is not as interesting in this way, is that like this movie is way more playful with its imagery, and it is much more concerned with the actual camera element of it. Like as much as like, you know, future documentaries in this style have kind of leaned in on score and like audio elements to like sync with it. Like I think that this would work like truly as a silent film, although I think Vertov had notes for scoring this movie, which is apparently what the Alois Orchestra used. So maybe he should have stuck with the camera.
Maybe he had bad taste in music.
Maybe he did.
So before Andrew gives his take, we've heard me ramble a bunch from 8 years ago. Let's hear Andrew go.
Tangent us for just a minute and then come back to the whole Marxist thing. So while the central sequence of like people working in the factories and like you're jumping back and forth to radio operators and the people putting together cigarette boxes and all these different things. And these are moments in which people are reduced to machines. I was thinking a lot about a book that I know at least two of you guys have read, Present Shock by Douglas Rushkoff. He talks about, at least at the beginning of the book, about like the creation of time and how like we have constructed this idea of like quantifiable time to go along with factories and alarm bells and ways in which we can like make people go from doing this thing to doing this thing to doing this thing. And so we can kind of like program human life and make sure your day is rhythmically structured in the way that, you know, the creators of labor and factory and industry and all those things can kind of turn people into types of machines, right? And, you know, later on he goes to talk about how like that collapses with modern technology and like all things happening at the same time. But since reading the book, it's something that I have felt like very acutely. You know, working in a public school, my life is run by like a period bell. I can't go to the bathroom unless that bell has rung, right? And so there are a lot of ways in which like we adapt to fit this like robotic mold rather than adapting the robotic mold to fit us, right? And so I was really surprised when Zach was reading out the info sheet about this movie that like these sequences about people at work, like fulfilling these robotic tasks in ways that are so fast and overwhelming, was meant to be spun as a positive thing. Like I was so stressed out because I was just thinking about like all the things that I'm required to cram into one day and never having enough time for it. And this is like, hooray, people as machines and just doing all the things at the same time. It made me very uncomfortable.
You know, I feel like I was pretty correct in some ways there.
I want to hear what you were going to circle back to with Marxism.
Who knows? Who knows? But I think that now I look at this very differently, but I understand why I, as like somebody who just started working as a teacher like 2 years ago or something, when I said those things, like why this movie activated like the stress response in my brain and made me uncomfortable in that way. Now that I am like a little bit more used to the life of a teacher, like this movie doesn't like give me trauma flashbacks to that or anything like that. And I kind of see the rapid pace of it as being more concerned with just like capturing movement and momentum as like a thing that cinema is really good at doing. And also sort of like to circle back around to the Marxist thing, it is depicting society as this like well-oiled machine where like everybody is contributing. And because everybody is contributing, it is just like the wheels are turning smooth and like frictionlessly, right? It is a propaganda film, after all. And there is something cool about that ideal being depicted, although we'll of course never live in that world, right? Also, a real big movie for train guys. If you like trains,
hell yeah.
There's so much of like when I'm thinking about all the world just kind of like fluidly working together, I'm especially thinking about the sequences where like the trains aren't even really having to stop while their tracks are intersecting, right? Because they're so perfectly spaced out that it is just like this constantly flowing, like perpetual motion machine of public transit and people walking around.
And
It's
they
very
play with
much-
that later too of like the double and triple exposures of like the same train tracks. Like
Yeah.
trains are kind of colliding, but still like not.
Yes, absolutely.
It's very much the movie version of that meme that's like, this is the world we could be living in if blank didn't happen. Like,
Absolutely.
it's very idealistic.
If
in that
Stalin didn't happen or something.
Yeah.
It is really interesting to compare it to other movies, and I'm not going to mention this movie again, but like Koyaanisqatsi is in a lot of ways like this, except it ultimately presents it as kind of like a something that's like despoiled the earth, right? Like it's like ultimately
life
like
out of balance
message. And then like a movie that's a little bit more closer to the release of this film is like Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, which also like presents this kind of mechanized world and the kind of smooth operation of like people and jobs, but also presenting that as something dystopian. And maybe there's something to be said about like how neither of those artists had some like felt like they had to prove something for their society, whereas I guess like a newly like post-revolutionary country would have to.
Right.
But I ended up thinking quite a lot about this. I was like, yeah, this is kind of interesting, which I hadn't thought of when I saw this movie the first time, like 10 years ago or whatever. But it is interesting how utopian it is and how much that does fit with like at that point, like the kind of Marxist ideal, like that was in the Soviet Union, which was like rapid industrialization, right? Like that is what the Soviet Union, like one of the first like kind of projects of
fully
like,
automated luxury communism.
Yeah. And I mean, like in a lot of ways, it is a very impressive accomplishment, like in terms of just like statecraft and like, taking what was in some ways like just a feudal society and like within a couple of decades, making it something that was, on par with, a lot of the Western world. But that you don't often get, I guess nowadays, the kind of techno-utopianism. And in some ways it also seems to presage like the kind of like 50s sci-fi too, like you're kind of really that really optimistic like golden age
retrofuturism. Yeah.
Well, at the time I think it was just futurism.
Right.
But anyway, I think Andrew, you had a good point years ago.
Thanks, old me.
Reid, had you seen this before?
I actually had not. I feel like I've read so much about this movie over the course of the past, however long since I've been in school.
Yeah.
And I had never seen it. I've seen some like Eisenstein movies, so like I was kind of going in thinking it would be somewhat akin to that, and it's really nothing.
You weren't prepared for the camera hooliganism or whatever Eisenstein said about this movie.
No, he hated this movie. Or hated might be strong. He found it pointless. But no, I really, I don't know. I was pretty fascinated with it. I thought for like a 60-minute movie, it is so fast paced and has so many interesting ideas about image. I watched it also with a score that was like, it was fine. It was just whatever was on YouTube, frankly. But the score was fine, but it felt like so anachronistic, which again, I guess, Andrew, your score would also be anachronistic.
Yeah.
Inherently too. It's like, I don't know, it would probably be fine depending on what it is, but this one just felt so wrong. Like it didn't feel like it fit too well. It was, the score itself is fine, I guess, but it didn't feel like it fit. But it added so much like propulsion to the movie that's already so propulsive.
It's on the screen.
And then yeah, and then it prescribed a little maybe too much. Like the score slows down so much, like, oh, okay, we're probably getting, the score is just so obvious, it's like we're probably getting to the point. And then that's when it leads into like the slow motion like athletics segment of the film. But no, I found it honestly really fascinating just in terms of like images and like montage like colliding. in a way that was super fun to watch, honestly.
Was it Eisenstein who coined the term montage? Or where does that come from? I thought that
I
was
don't know if he literally coined it, but he's the one that like wrote the most about it early on.
Right.
And to him, it meant, God, I gotta pull out some like old school film theory, but like it meant something fairly different than the way you might assess it with this movie. So to him, the idea was like the meaning that comes from images meeting, as opposed to simply like the cutting that we maybe use to refer to it now.
Are you talking about the what's it called, like the Kushelkov effect or whatever?
Yeah. And so I think that honestly probably gets to maybe why he didn't like this movie, because it's not maybe seeking to make as much meaning out of the images as much as it's trying to make the images do things.
Well, it makes jokes too, like the editing.
Yeah.
Like the edits, the meaning out of the edits a lot of times is just like meant to be kind of like funny you know, like you're at marriage court or like the marriage clerk and then immediately cut to the divorce clerk. Like, you know, like there's just stuff like that where it's like just like kind of drunk on the idea of like, oh, I can put all these things together and crosscut and all this stuff, and it's going to be kind of weird. I think like there's so many like just fun like juxtapositions. Like at one point, there's like a sewing machine and that cuts to like a film editing machine, or something like. There's just like so many of them that are just like very fun and whimsical connections.
It's very interested in like motion, like continuing together. I feel like there's the track that they're riding the motorcycles on cuts together with something else that there's just like everything for about a 5 or 6 minute stretch is a circular motion. Like maybe not as like it's not a still image like circular, but you're following something in a circle or oval, and that seems like that's like the gist of what this movie is interested in.
But then,
Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
I was gonna say, speaking of still images, though, like another kind of like I don't know joke in the movie is like all these people are getting in vehicles, and you're like, oh yeah, here we go, and they're starting to go. Then all of a sudden, you do just get a montage of single frames without the actual motion, which I think is just like an amazing little like subversion in that moment.
And like, despite the fact that the camera is front and center, that's called Man with a Movie Camera, it feels like it is embracing editing as like the primary thing that films are made of. You know, this is not depicting. It's not just different than literature and theater in that it has a visual element, because theater definitely has a visual element, but that visual element is presented to you in a way that is mediated through film editing, which, like, as you said, this movie is kind of like drunk on the possibilities of it. It's sort of like presenting cinema as like, this is what cinema could be, you know, in a time when people are still kind of trying to figure out what cinema is and can be.
I was thinking about that while watching it. In like I saw some like Letterboxd reviews of people, and they're like giving it like 2 or 2.5 stars, and I'm just
get out of here with
like,
that.
what do you think this is gonna be? You think this is like
the dialogue?
Yeah, like what are you doing?
Deadpool didn't even show up.
Yeah, exactly. But like it's relatively like a relatively academic movie. Like it is, to your point, like it's kind of going like what all can we do with not only the camera but like the film. And we talked about that a lot re-listening to episode 140. We talked a lot about like just like the tangible nature of this. Like it feels like a very tangible film. Like you're literally cutting physical film, and so like they're making all of this stuff happen in a way that like if they don't like how they cut it, like they lost the shot,
right?
And to that point, like I was thinking about it. It seems like a very like a purely academic exercise, but it also feels very modern. Like I think a lot of it, you're watching it and it kind of glosses over you, like us as like modern viewers, because we're kind of, you see these types of shots not only in movies but like in television shows and just any type of like visual media to a degree. And here it's kind of like let's play with the possibilities. And honestly, it does stuff that you're just like, damn, like that's not only impressive because it's 1929, but that's just impressive, like an impressive way of like displaying your loose narrative.
I mean, as I was saying, like, this is a time when people are still trying to figure out what movies can be. This is not the direction that movies as a whole went. So, like, it doesn't feel dated at all. This is like, it still feels new. It still feels fresh. It still feels like this is a novel idea, you know? And there are other movies that have attempted to do things like this. There's a whole, like, subgenre of avant-garde films that you would call city symphony film. There's like Manhattan, and then Koyaanisqatsi, which you talked about, and The Dockworker's Dream. You could also maybe throw in that category. I don't know, but this movie still feels like so like exploding with ideas and energy that even looking at some of the modern counterparts, like this, kind of like towers over them in some ways.
Yeah. I wanna. She's not on the episode today, but Nadine. Talked about this movie. She was on the episode for 140, but she talked about this when we did episode 57 and 58, which was us declaring what the greatest movies of all time were after 50 some odd episodes. And she talks about Man with a Movie Camera and why she thinks that that's the greatest movie of all time. And this is what she had to say.
I think the things it chooses to show are very intentional. Yeah, there are a lot of shots of bustling traffic in cities, you know, of workers in factories, of miners, and things like that. There are also a lot of other kind of shots that are very intentionally chosen, but feel a little odd. Like there's one sequence that alternates between a woman getting dressed and then just like different signs, just like signs on the street. And I think one thing that's really interesting to me about that is that while it's a movie about a cameraman and while it's very reliant on what you're seeing visually, it's very intentional in its editing. And that's something that kind of interests me about a lot of early Russian filmmakers, is because they were really trying to push the boundaries of what had been done in film up to that point. And obviously there wasn't a deep history, of film at that point. But people like Vertov, who did this film, and Eisenstein were really thinking about editing, which I think even more sometimes than cinematography is kind of like the most crucial part of making a movie. Because cinematography, and especially if you're just talking about movies as movies, because cinematography kind of comes from photography, but editing is really, like, when you think about it, the only part of movie making that is kind of exclusive to movies. And so they were really thinking about theory, and while they were making movies that were designed to be entertaining, they were really successfully, I think, exercising studies in theory and making films that are experimental but also could be played an audience.
I hope you all enjoyed in that. Nadine's former like neighbors or whatever would be like rocking out in a band, and like I used like the audio enhancer to like pull that out as much as possible because it's much louder in the actual episode of it.
That's so funny.
That's amazing.
Nadine, completely correct.
100%.
Yeah.
And I should maybe at this point mention what I watched this movie while listening to, because it was in honor of Nadine. Nadine at the time, which I think this was 2015 that we got together to talk about the best movies of all time. She on Letterboxd mentioned she watched it while listening to 3-6 Mafia's album, The Underground Volume 1. Which I cannot recommend enough as a score for this movie, because I'll try not to talk too much about 3-6 Mafia. I'm not an expert in what they do, but like that album has a kind of feels like it has a kinship with Man with a Movie Camera, because it's hip hop music, but it's like a very experimental kind of hip hop music that is like primarily made through loops. And like looping of vocals specifically. So rather than you hearing, new lines constantly over repeating beats, it's like repeating lines over and over and over throughout songs, in kind of like a hypnotic, like persistently rhythmic kind of way. And like it felt like it kind of synced up with the editing style of this movie. That's just like constantly bombarding you with like new image, but like in this very like rigid structure, I guess. It both felt like very formally like speaking the same language in a way. So, and it's also like pretty much the same amount of time as the movie. I think that the album finished like 2 minutes before it ended, but I also had to pause and like do some like technical stuff on my computer. So I think that if you actually listen to it straight through, it would fit perfectly.
I got no reference point to that.
Sorry.
Cool. It sounds great.
It's good.
The thing I was thinking about, Nadine makes the point that like they're also kind of referencing back to like cinema's history up to that point, which is like what 30, 40 years or something, maybe if that at that point. And it is kind of a like forwarding the conversation at a lot of points. You mentioned like it's a big train guy movie, a lot of trains, and there's like a couple scenes where it feels like a recreation of the Lumiere brothers train coming into the station, but from like a more like a much more dangerous angle, like under the train, and
he's doing
like
Buster Keaton shit
on the train. Yeah, like it's kind of like, hey, like let's take that and move that conversation forward a little bit, which makes
I like
me
that
sad because we should have more conversations in forwarding trains and movies and you know, in cinema
what was
history.
the Mission Impossible
Strongly
movie
agree.
that ends with the falling train?
The most recent one.
Yeah, that's the lone holdout.
Yeah,
Train cinema.
I do like, speaking of that, often when you're getting these like really crazy audacious shots, after that shot is over, you will then get a shot watching what the camera was doing, as kind of like a way of showing, you know, cinema as like a form of labor, just like all these other forms of labor you're being shown throughout the movie, like editing as well. And sort of like asking the audience to kind of admire the commitment that goes into making cinema. Like it is like a physical task.
Some of those shots with the cameraman are so funny because you know that there's another cameraman doing the same thing.
Yes.
Like there's the scene where there's the two cars driving side by side and one of them has a cameraman like filming the people in the car next to them. And all I could think of was there's a third car behind that with the cameraman filming the cameraman.
It's cameramans all the way down.
It's kind of like when you watch a skateboarding video and you're aware of the person skateboarding, but then you're also aware of the cameraman skateboarding.
Yeah.
Like in my mind, I think about that all the time. But I agree completely with what you're saying about the cameraman, but it also seemed like a joke of the movie that the cameraman was pretty much always late to the scene.
Oh yeah.
Like it would be at the beach for like 3 or 4 minutes. We're getting these crazy shots of like people on the beach. And then eventually the cameraman shows up and he doesn't even film while he's there. He just like lays in the water for a bit.
He walks into the water with his camera at one point.
Yeah.
And I also love the shot where he's it looks like he and his camera are kind of like floating on the water, but I think they're actually just like in like the super low tide. But so many cool trick shots in this movie.
And they do the stop motion bit too with the tripod and camera.
Yes.
Which I thought
I
that
love
was cool.
that. How many documentaries have like special effects? Like this movie
is
incredible.
Any final thoughts on Man with a Movie Camera before we wrap up?
I would say that this is a movie that I would recommend to folks who have not watched a lot of silent cinema, honestly. Like I know a lot of people, like it's just not their thing, or they've never watched a silent movie and it just seems like a different language because it is. And so it's, you know, it feels intimidating, but this is a movie that is so like visceral and immediate and propulsive, as we've been talking about, that I don't think that you're ever going to experience the kind of like boredom that people associate in their minds with silent cinema if they've, you know, not gotten a taste for it.
I would say the same about avant-garde cinema too. This is a great avant-garde, like dip your toe in.
Sarah watched maybe a handful of minutes as I was watching. She caught like a few minutes, and at one point she goes, "Oh, you're really just watching some images, huh?"
That's all we ever do on cinema.
Moving pictures.
Like you summed it up perfectly.
I got nothing to add to that. That's perfect.
I have one thing to add though, which is that this movie is a lie. Like the like beginning is like there is no actor, there is no theater or whatever, and then immediately you see theater and there's the actor the whole time with the movie camera. Like,
Damn. False advertising.
The lie at the
This is
heart
what
of cinema.
Stalin did to us.
These damn Soviets, they lied to us.
This is lying communists.
All right. Well, before we do the full wrap up, we got to go to our wheel.
We got to go to the wheel, and there have been some changes to the wheel. We should mention that.
Yeah, Andrew, you want to talk about the changes?
Yeah. So part of we had two ideas of movies we wanted to add to the list. One of which was inspired by the passing of the great David Lynch, who we realized we've never actually done an episode on a David Lynch movie, despite, almost 500 of these things, and David Lynch being one of the most preeminent filmmakers of our lifetimes.
This is like the movie podcast equivalent of when you go to a funeral and see your cousin and you're like, why don't we hang out more?
Yeah, exactly. But we did do Mulholland Drive for, was it episode 200 or 250? 200 when we decided to do drunk history cinematary, where we assigned each other to watch confusing movies and had to explain them drunk. So I'm really excited about hearing Zach's drunk audio explaining the plot of Mulholland Drive, which that's what we're adding to our wheel. I don't remember what we cut. Oh, we cut Woman on the Verge of a Nervous Break.
Sorry.
Woman Under the Influence. Yeah.
Woman Under the Influence, sorry.
We cut that to put Mulholland Drive on there, and then we cut Ernst Lubitsch's Trouble in Paradise to talk about The Witch,
which we did have an episode on
really early, because The Witch actually came out pretty shortly after Cinematary began, and it's interesting to look back on that movie with 10 years removed from its release, and kind of. I think it'll be interesting to kind of talk about how the horror landscape has changed since then, and what place that movie kind of has in the modern horror canon, because I think it definitely has one. I've also taught that movie for 5 years, so it'll be interesting to talk about it on a podcast after only talking about it with high schoolers for the most part.
I haven't seen it in years.
I haven't seen it since the theater.
Let me tell you, it is so good.
Yeah, I'm excited to
rewatched it a year ago, and I liked it a lot more than even the first time.
So we got The Witch and Mulholland Drive. We still have Stagecoach, Duck Soup, and Colonel Blimp. Let's see what we're going to be talking about in the next episode.
I'm so excited.
Well, it looks like we're talking about The Witch.
The Witch!
The Witch.
Yeah, I don't even have to rewatch this movie. I have it memorized now.
All right. Well, there you go. We got The Witch coming up next. Man, I kind of wanted to watch Duck Soup, but it's all good. It's still on.
It's gonna come.
It's still on the wheel.
And then after the Witch, that's already set because we're doing Chunking Express for the live pod.
Yeah. So we got The Witch and then Chunking Express, and then we'll go back to. Do you think the IPH will let us have the wheel on the movie screen?
Oh, please. Please.
Well, everybody's sitting there just going, what are you doing? All right. Well, that'll wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Instagram at @Cinematary and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary. We post all the movies that we talked about in this episode. Grace is not here, but she would encourage you to follow us on Instagram. We're going to have some fun stories and such posted there while we're all in Charlotte together. If you would like to support the show, patreon.com/Cinematary. You can donate $1. You can donate $5. You can donate your whole income for the past year. It's up to you. Thank you to our patron. What?
I said I'll take it.
Yeah, there. Thank you to our patrons, Cam, Ron Hayes, Tanner Huskins, Teresa Marsati, and Tyler Chandler. We appreciate your patronage. We will see y'all next episode with The Witch.